Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi tayyibin tahirin. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. In every society, most of the people that you see are behaving in a way that is consistent with whatever the norms are for that society, whatever the behavioral norms are. So they're not necessarily behaving in a way that's based on any type of a principle, ethical principle, moral principle, religious principle. They're just simply conforming to the norm. Those people who conform with societal norms are considered to be good by the society overall. And those that do not conform to the societal norm have a variety of negative labels. They're subject to prejudice, discrimination. Sometimes they're jailed, sometimes they're even killed. This is true in all societies. It's not specific to either Muslim or non-Muslim societies. And from the point of view of Islam, it is very important that Muslims conform their behavior to the principles of our faith, as taught by the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and his purified progeny, the Ahl al-Bayt ﷺ, and the Holy Quran. This is important even if those principles contradict the norms of the society, the norms and trends of the society that the Muslim lives in. Today our subject is what is a good Muslim, and the good is in air quotes because in not all cases would I, or probably most people listening, agree with the adjective being used as in regards to good. So the three definitions that we're going to be talking about are what I'm calling the useless definition, the harmful definition, and then the useful definition. So first, what is the useless definition? A useless definition of a good Muslim is a definition that's based on the desires and whims of other people or of the society that you live in. So this definition of good Muslim is generally something that people who are not Muslim define, and it's generally defined as behaving in a way that fits with their own views or their own opinions. So in other words, it's a socially constructed definition of a good Muslim. And obviously in the United States, being a non-Muslim society, there's lots of things that are very common and considered even normal in American society today that Islam does not agree with and Islam does not allow Muslims to do. An example of this is fornication is becoming very common in the United States. Fornication meaning men and women having sexual relationships with each other outside of marriage. Currently, almost 50%, this is as of 2013, of all children born in the United States are born to unwed mothers. According to several articles I read and just my experience in the country as a whole, people having relationships, men and women having relationships outside of marriage is actually now more common than men and women having relationships within marriage. So it's actually becoming what's called, quote unquote, the new normal in the United States. Of course, this is something that is not acceptable or accepted in Islam. Another example of things that are commonly accepted in the society, in American society, that are not allowed by Islam is alcohol. So as of 2015, the United States was the second largest consumer of beer in the world. That's behind Germany. The average American consumed 20 gallons. Not the average, but per capita, Americans consume 20 gallons or 76 liters of beer. And in other words, that's per person. So if you just take the total amount of beer consumed in the United States and divide it by the number of people, then that would be 20 gallons or 76 liters of beer per person just in 2015. And of course, not everyone drinks, so therefore the actual amount is higher than that. And again, that's only beer. That doesn't include wine. It doesn't include other categories of alcohol such as distilled spirits or hard liquor. Another example is gambling. Gambling is a major industry in the United States. The total revenue just from casinos in the United States in 2015 was estimated to be $71 billion. That's with a B. That's about $250 per adult per year just spent in casinos. And this number does not include other types of gambling, such as online gambling, sports betting, which these are multi-billion-dollar industries by themselves. So obviously, as any Muslim knows, and probably a lot of non-Muslims probably know, none of these things are acceptable in Islam. They're considered haram. They're considered sinful and are punished. But of course, they're not, by the average American, average non-Muslim American, they're considered perfectly normal and something that they do easily and readily quite often, as you can tell from the figures quoted. This idea of people outside of the faith of Islam basically asking Muslims, or even asking the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, to basically change the religion or change the rules of religion to suit their personal interests or tastes or the norms of the society, that goes back all the way to the founding of Islam and to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Of course, most of us Muslims are familiar with hadiths, and other non-Muslims may even be familiar with them, hadiths of people coming to the Prophet saying, we love the religion, we like these parts of the religion, but can you just change this, or can you just change this, because we really like doing this thing? And of course the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ responded, it's not my religion, this religion is from God, it's based on revelation, so I can't, it's not negotiable, I can't change any of the rules of the religion to suit individual people or to suit individual societies. It's a message for all time and for all of mankind. And so, of course, if you decide that you're going to follow your religion and not conform to what the society or what other people want you to, the way they want you to act or things that they want you to do, then they consider, or you're labeled as a fundamentalist, you're labeled as an extremist simply for following your religion. So that's the first definition, which is the useless definition. And of course, I call it the useless definition because defining yourself as a good Muslim or a bad Muslim based on what the overall society that you live in thinks about what you're doing is not going to help you to progress either in your faith, or it's not going to help you be successful in life in general. The second definition that we want to talk about, it's considered the harmful definition. This is different than the useless definition because the useless definition is something that's been around, again, as we said, for a very long time, since the founding of Islam. And it's a general principle that operates whenever Muslims live in a non-Muslim society. The harmful definition is something a little more sinister. It's actually something that's relatively new, and it was deliberately constructed by a certain group of people in the United States, which we're calling them the Islamophobes, which we have an entire video that talks about Islamophobia, but these are basically the people behind the current Islamophobia movement. Some of the people mentioned that I'm going to mention are Daniel Pipes, Newt Gingrich, but there's of course lots of other people in the United States that they have a very specific agenda and a very specific formula for trying to discredit Islam and Muslims, and specifically to try to discredit or basically insult or other things, anybody who attempts to follow their religion as a Muslim in the United States. The harmful definition, it basically tries to, people like Newt Gingrich and Daniel Pipes, they essentially try to define Islamic law or Sharia law based on the most extreme or the most incorrect and extreme interpretations of Islamic law that are of course common in a very small but very specific branch of Islam, which is the Salafi Wahhabi school of Islam, that basically that the most extreme interpretations from that particular school, they basically attempt to apply that to all Muslims, and then to basically say that anyone who follows Islamic law is following the type of Islamic law that is practiced among the most extreme and violent terrorist groups such as ISIS and such as Al-Qaeda. They're basically trying to say that these groups represent Islam or Muslims as a whole. They're arguing that anybody who follows Islamic law at all is a member of a terrorist group or is similar to or very much like the terrorist groups that are criminals and that kill innocent people, and therefore all Muslims are dangerous, all Muslims need to be subject to additional scrutiny, Muslims even, they've called for Muslims in the United States to be deported, etc. That definition is, of course, much more dangerous than the useless definition, and that's the reason why I call it the harmful definition. Because of all the definitions, that one, of course, is the most harmful, because if a Muslim accepts their argument and believes that following the Islamic law or following the Sharia law would make somebody a terrorist or make somebody like those extremist Wahhabi Salafi groups, then that's extremely dangerous, because it would cause a person eventually to just either disregard their religion completely or to become a terrorist. So they basically try to define it as this stark choice between either being a terrorist or a terrorist sympathizer or giving up your religion. So that's obviously extremely dangerous. On the other hand, they accept people, somebody can call themselves a Muslim. They don't really care about that. What they care about is that if you in any way show any outward signs or behavior that associates you with Islam, then they consider you a fundamentalist or terrorist. So if you're a woman and you wear a headscarf, or if you're a man or woman and you attend the mosque on a regular basis, etc., then they consider you a fundamentalist. On the other hand, if you drink alcohol, if you gamble and still call yourself a Muslim, then of course they'll love you and they'll consider you a good Muslim, because then they consider you modern, westernized, etc., etc. So this is of course very dangerous, very harmful, and again, it's a very deliberate type of activity that's done by a very specific group of people that is distinguishable, very much distinguishable from the useless definition that we talked about above. And of course, that definition is much more harmful. Generally speaking, Muslims understand when people like the people that I mentioned, when they talk, that they're basically just they're very extreme in their views as well, and they generally dismiss them. But there are, of course, Muslims that are influenced by their views, and in some cases, their views are tolerated by the overall society. Not necessarily, they don't think that it's necessarily accurate, but they're tolerated. And you do see things that they say in mainstream publications, so it is important to mention. Of course, their definition of a good Muslim is very, very dangerous and harmful. So then we come to the final question, which is what is the correct definition of a good Muslim? What is the definition that's useful, that's going to be helpful to a Muslim? And of course, a principle that every person, not just Muslims, but Muslims and non-Muslims accept, is that to be successful, a person must logically and rationally decide which principles, values, and morals they're going to follow. If these values and principles are correct and they follow them, then of course they'll be successful. The principles and values that a person accepts and follows should be changed only in the case where the principles and values do not allow the person to achieve the desired result. In other words, they don't result in success for that person. So of course, if your goal is this thing and you believe that by doing these actions or believing these things, it will result in success, and then you do those things and then you do not achieve the goal, then in that particular case, it's legitimate to say, well, maybe I should try something else, maybe I should do something else. But the worst thing that you can possibly do is to say, oh, well, I agree that these principles and values are sound and correct, but there's just too much pressure from my family, from my society, from other people around me, from people at my work, so therefore I can't follow these principles, even though I know that they're good and that they'll result in success. In other words, don't choose principles and values based on social pressure or social norms, because will inevitably result in, of course, failure. So a Muslim, of course, as most people listening to this know, is a person that believes and follows the example of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and his Ahl al-Bayt ﷺ and the principles of faith contained in the Holy Quran. So that's the basis of the religion. So it's following the examples of the Prophet Muhammad and the Ahl al-Bayt ﷺ, and then following the principles, the religious moral principles that are contained in the Holy Quran. So if we use those things to define ourselves as a good Muslim or bad Muslim, in other words, if we are following the example of the Prophet, if we're following the principles contained in the Holy Quran, then we consider ourselves a good Muslim. And if we're not doing those things, then obviously we need to change, we need to correct our actions and our behavior. That's ultimately the definition of a good Muslim that will lead somebody to success. both in this world and in the hereafter. And inshallah, everyone, when they choose to look at themselves and reflect on whether or not they are a good Muslim, they will choose this definition to use. Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.